the challenges of drone planting, they're mostly in infrastructure. And this is why when we talk about startups, find themselves to developed countries, to rich countries.
This is The Butterfly Effect, a podcast that shows the big impact a small action can do. Tali Orad is talking to those special people that make a difference with nature and trees.
Welcome everyone to The Butterfly Effect. My name is Tali Orad. I'm your host and your butterfly here. My special guest today is Irina Fedorenko. Irina is a serial tech entrepreneur. She co-founded an innovating forestry startup that uses drones for forest restoration and is currently the managing director of Caux Dialogue on Environment and Security, an initiative for land, lives, and peace program. This program brings together senior policymakers, project managers, and social entrepreneurs to examine best practices of land restoration, climate change mitigation, and peace building. Irina has a PhD in geography and the environment from the University of Oxford. Her academic interests focus on entrepreneurship in Russia and China and the use of technology for social and environmental change. Welcome, Irina, to The Butterfly Effect.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It is wonderful to have you on the show. So, you are a scientist working on several forest restoration related projects. I'm excited for us to be able to speak about some of them today. Let's start with the one involving the tree planting using drones. Can you start by painting a picture to our listeners of how it's done? How do drones plant trees?
So the process of tree planting by drones is basically quite straightforward. Well, we say tree planting drones, but actually we are talking about drones that disperse seeds. So for people who are visualizing massive drones carrying little saplings, I have to disappoint you because those are really drones carrying seeds or seed balls or seed capsules. And the advantage of the drones is that they can go to the areas that are hard to reach. They can go to the areas where maybe it's dangerous for humans to be, or areas that are just like really uncomfortable for people, such as mangroves, swamps.
Mhm.
And the drones have seed dispersal mechanisms, and they release seeds.
And how big are they?
The drones need to be quite large. So again, we're not talking about small kind of customer facing drones that people use for videos. The drones need to be able to lift at least 20 kilos, and so we're talking about a meter maybe in diameter, quadrocopters or octocopters. So
Mhm.
they can be and should be quite large.
To put things in perspective, when we plant trees, we measure the area by obviously by hectares, and 1 hectare is equivalent to a baseball field. So we can plant between 1,000 and 2,500 trees per hectare,
Mm.
which is a day's work for 500 to 100 people. How long does it take for a drone to plant on an equivalent size area?
About 1 hour. So it would, of course, depend on the type of seeds and how hard is the terrain. But basically, in terms of just flight time and in terms of just seed dispersal time, it should not take more than an hour. You need to have a team of pilots with you in the field. There's also a technology that is called swarm technology. So you could use multiple drones at the same time
Mhm.
or with one pilot. Well, technically, you need two pilots, right? You need the pilot and a co pilot.
Why two pilots for one drone?
Legally speaking, it's for health and safety. So, because normally you just don't want to send just one person in the field, and most countries actually require to have a co pilot for health and safety, or also to monitor the sky. Because, well, when we use tree planting drones, we're talking about maybe flying 3, 4, maybe 5 meters off the ground, maybe just like a couple of meters off the ground.
Mhm.
But if we are doing mapping, we're talking about flying maybe 10 to 50 meters off the ground. So basically, sort of already a bird's eye. The mapping drones, they look like birds, and They could be attacked by birds, like this is the the most common sort of cause of death of a
Right.
mission drone is being attacked by eagles or other birds. So
Right.
you really need a co-pilot to always have the eyes in the sky.
So you're shooting many capsules in an area,
Mhm.
and while the capsule holds everything that the seed needs to survive and actually become a tree, it doesn't mean that it will, right?
Yeah.
So, what is the survival rate when you're doing this type of process of planting with drones versus taking a shovel and doing the traditional planting process?
The survival rate will inevitably always depend on not only on the seed condition, local condition, but also on the multiple factors such as weather, droughts, earthquakes, floodings,
Hmm.
all of the environmental factors. But basically, the survival rate with a drone will be always similar to hand spreading of seeds, and probably better in some cases than just hand spreading, because the capsule is designed to protect the seed, but it will always be lower than sapling and seedling planting, because obviously seedlings already had a head start of at least 1 year in a perfect condition in a nursery. And of course, you'll choose those that survive, those that are the strongest to go and plant them on the side. Whereas with seeds, you don't even know what seeds will germinate.
Right.
Obviously, if people going after precision, having the best survival and ensuring absolutely kind of minimal risks, then of course seedlings and saplings are always the best. We haven't invented anything new in this department, unfortunately, and the tree planting hasn't changed since the Iron Age. So in terms of innovation, the shovel is the last innovation that happened in this department.
Well, we can't obviously compete with the shovel and that innovation, but we do have the invention of drones, and it's a very important one.
The tree planting drones, so that's an invention of Dr. Lauren Fletcher. They've been kind of invented to fill the gap between sort of hand planting and the helicopter. So it's exactly the solution in the middle. You have the best rates from hand planting, you have least survival from the helicopter. So the drones are basically in the middle.
I see. And I'm assuming that you just spread more capsules in order for getting better chances of survival.
Yeah, that's so basically there are a few things. First of all, if we are talking about post-fire restoration of a patch of a forest, for example,
Hmm.
yes, of course, you would spread more capsules, obviously. So, say if you aimed at 80% survival with saplings, maybe you think about 20 or 30 or maybe 50% survival with seed balls. So, you just increase the number of seed balls. And I know in the space there have been some experiments where you have already uptake and survival rate from sort of post fire restoration, which is closer to the natural forest, but the trees are obviously further from each other, and they're not it's not as dense as you would normally plant it by hand. But if we are just talking about natural kind of regeneration and restoration, this is actually quite beneficial, because then if the trees are a bit further from each other, they're more resilient to forest fires.
Right.
Obviously, if you are going after carbon yields or some kind of managed plantation, then of course you want more control, and then you may want to plant trees by hand.
Basically, our forests are ecosystems, right? They're made up of living beings such as trees, plants, animals, insects, and microorganisms that are in constant interaction between themselves and that are affected by other physical or chemical component. I mean, you talked about
Mhm.
fires, there's the sun, there is temperature, oxygen, so many things. How do you restore an ecosystem using drones? I mean, how do you know what needs to be planted and how do you apply it in the process?
Basically, you have several approaches, right, to ecosystem restoration, depending how you look at it. So if you are coming from like engineering technical background, you look at an ecosystem from sort of a spreadsheet point of view, and you just put the right mix of ingredients, and you think about fungi, you think about microbes, right? You think about fertilizer, how many kilograms per hectare, and you kind of make a mix, and you put this mix into the seed balls. So you kind of approach it very precisely. And then you obviously have a grassroots point of view. If you come from an NGO, if you come from community work, then you think about indigenous knowledge, what is typically working in this area, what maybe nutrients, what additions do local people use, what kind of fertilizer the ancestors been using. So you kind of also look very much into from this traditional indigenous knowledge lens.
Hmm.
For example, I worked in Myanmar. There is a wealth of indigenous knowledge there, but with the climate changing and with the weather changing and also the tides changing, this indigenous knowledge is not always accurate, and it cannot maybe keep up always with the changes that people see around themselves. What we do in Beta Earth, we combine this indigenous knowledge with the latest space science. We arrive to this kind of coherent and well rounded view. We use the principles of the human centered design, and we build this every engagement and every project around the community. So we combine these technical lessons that we learn from building kind of engineering heavy companies with people's expertise and with indigenous knowledge that we have through a nonprofit work and previous experience working locally. And so we combine both of these world views, and we find an optimal combination. It's both microbes and fungi, but also people's insights, because no one knows the land better than people who actually live in it and people who care about it.
I am totally in agreement for that. And one of the things we're doing at 1 Trillion is planting with the help of the community. So men and women joining together, picking up a shovel, the
Mhm.
traditional shovel, and plant. They are also the one taking care of the trees. So by what you are talking is you take the knowledge of the community and plant with the drones. Do you also include the community in the planting, in the process besides that, maybe maintaining?
We always work with the local NGOs, the local tech hubs, and obviously the local seed suppliers to design a project that provides jobs, that provides kind of additional sources of income in terms of seed collection and seed preparation. Mapping also happens with the communities in mind, so that we always take care of the community's needs and decide where they may be doing hand planting or where they require drone planting.
Can you share an example?
So imagine the scenario where you're a coastal community and you want to plant mangroves from, say, east to west, and 5,000 hectares of the coast you have. And
Hmm.
you start from, say, east, and you're just able to plant maybe a couple of 100 hectares every year. And maybe you just don't have more labor, or you don't have more saplings, etc. So if you're doing that from the west, we come in from the east and also start planting. Because while you're just doing your few hectares a year on your side, if the landscape is degraded, in the meantime, your soil is just seeping away to the ocean. You see shore like it's eroding. You are
Hmm.
not protected from extreme weather events. You know, it's not like nature is waiting for you to,
Right.
to come and plant, right? The degradation is happening day by day. So in this kind of scenario, drones are especially appropriate because you want to stop this immediately, and you want to plant as much as possible, just to kind of to fix the soil, to fix the nitrogen, to start fixing carbon. And we would start from another side, and eventually we would meet in the middle. And by the time the community would reach. Say the eastern part, they will probably still be needed, so they'll still be needed to replant. As I said, you can't expect a really high kind of density from drones,
Hmm.
so they would need to do maybe supplement planting, or maybe they would want to plant some other species. It's a coexistence, and it's complementing communities' efforts.
Who provides the seeds for the planting?
That would be usually hyper local, and it is a big challenge. I think we don't talk enough about the seeds. There is a shortage of seeds globally, or at least not seeds, but the supply chains are not always well established, so it's always complicated to find enough seeds and to find high quality seeds. Of course, now we don't plant nearly enough, so it's not yet a problem. Usually we can source seeds from the local community or the neighboring communities, or employ more people, train more people to provide seeds to collect them. But as we as humanity scale up our tree planting efforts, we will have a really, really big challenge of seed supply chains.
So it's seed supply chain not in terms of seeds do not exist. It's just we need to go collect them.
Yeah, and more people need to find this an interesting and a desirable job, and more people need to be trained and actually get this knowledge, because not always this knowledge is available.
Right. And if we're going back to the ecosystem, if we take seeds from different locations and bring them back to an area where they do not belong, that will not be very good.
The seeds need to be hyper local, and I know that there are countries that just don't have their own seed banks and don't have their own kind of established seed supply, so every seed they have is imported.
Before we talk about your other project, I'd like to pause and talk about your expertise. You have a PhD in geography and the environment from Oxford University. What was your PhD's research about?
I researched environmental policy and the green economy policies in Russia and China. And I looked at forest protection groups, and I looked at youth movements, lobbying groups, and civil society in both countries. So I spent an amazing year in China also doing my field work, living in Kunming. It's in Yunnan next to Tibet. It's also obviously I've done a lot of interviewing in Russia. So I've been kind of looking at comparative policies, but also at what people on the ground were doing and projects that people on the ground were creating, and also looked at forest policies and forest economics, how these projects actually work and paid for themselves with kind of drying out of foreign funding and
Hmm.
with international aid basically leaving those countries. It happened, it was not the plan, but when I was doing the research, I was basically there at a time when the foreign funding just started to completely disappear. And I was looking at how local organizations were coping with that kind of lack of resources and pivoting to new business models, which was very eye-opening. It's a very, well, obviously very big countries, very hard to compare, but they do really set, I'd say, the tone for many other countries and civil society organizations, so that they have this lens in mind. I can see very similar processes happening in Latin America, in other Asian countries. It's disturbing, but unfortunately, nothing new.
So I don't know if it's part of what you research of or what you experienced, but I recently read an article on Bloomberg publication about China and its planting and its green goal.
Mm.
And actually, there are a few problems with their planting, especially when planting homogenic forests,
Mhm.
meaning forest with the same tree, and going back to our ecosystem, supporting the ecosystem that goes against it. And if going back to carbon sink, the effectiveness of such a forest is obviously less effective and almost by a third. So I'm just curious, did you see the same in your research?
It's hard to say, because I think it's really impressive what China has done in terms of desert restoration. to see the scale of the projects they can achieve. And I really admire the efforts by the government or the companies, because when one lives in China, you really see that it's not a choice. It's not like you can think about ecosystem restoration. It's like you do it or you die. It's a really good mindset that we need to get this done, and we need to get this done fast, and we need to get this done on a very large scale. Very few countries can actually pull that off. However, when it's done without proper evaluation or taking into account all the nuances and details, and of course, when stuff is monoculture, this is not the best. Yeah, that there are always reasons to critique, and there are always reasons to doubt the kind of the benefits of these projects. But if we look at kind of alternative scenarios, I think we agree that it's better to maybe have monoculture than have nothing.
So this is the butterfly effect, and I know you're involved with another project that is called the Butterfly in Dutch, and he's helping communities with earning a living from the forest and keeping this process transparent to all stakeholders. And obviously, when communities do not cut the forest, actually keep it standing, this is a huge thing for us all. Can you share with us exactly what is it that this butterfly is doing?
I'm a carbon markets lead at Vlinder, which is butterfly in Dutch. And Vlinder is founded by people who used to work in blockchain space. Well, they still work in blockchain space, but they really dedicated themselves to impact and using blockchain for climate impact. And they believe in butterfly effect, hence the name Vlinder. And the idea is to democratize carbon investment and the marketplace for carbon credits to enable complete trust and transparency in nature-based solutions. So Vlinder believes in investing in specifically tree planting, blue carbon, and also protecting one of the most biodiverse ecosystems, such as Amazon rainforest. So what it really does, it makes very efficient, very transparent investments in those projects. So it is very, very strict to selecting the best quality projects, the projects that have not only carbon benefits but also community benefits, biodiversity benefits, and really look at the systems in a holistic way. Then it empowers people and companies to offset the emissions through the blockchain. And again, it avoids double counting, and it allows people to really be confident and really track their impact in real time.
Is there a project you can share with us?
One of the projects that Vlinder invested in is the Worldview International Foundation project in Myanmar. They are planting a lot of mangrove trees, and they really have an amazing community engagement program. The communities in the center, and communities benefit from sustaining the forests, because as we know, planting the forest is just really
The first
one
step.
part. It's like the first step in a journey which is at least 20 years long. What they do is they change the perception, they align the incentives in a way that the community starts to perceive the forest, that becomes more valuable as it's standing rather than cutting it down.
And when you say help the community, you mean help financially, right? And you mean, so one of the things is when you offset carbon, you need to do it annually. And I'm assuming the system basically provide that annual income coming from offsetting back to the community so they will see the value of not cutting them down.
Yes, that is correct. This is the model that the Worldview International Foundation is using, and it's really working well when they share the carbon proceeds with the local communities, and people see real impact, and they see their quality of life improving every year because they take care of the forests, right? So it's not only the fish stock is improving, for example, because mangroves provide breeding ground for fish, right? It's not only
Hmm.
they're able to start new businesses such as like shrimp farming in the mangrove roots, they see very tangible impact on what they do. So we believe it's really a sustainable way. On the one hand, it's very pragmatic. On the other hand, that's the reality. We just have to accept that, you can't explain a immaterial value of biodiversity to a person who's hungry right now.
Right.
You have to feed them first. It is pragmatic, but I do believe it really works.
And you also show them the dependency, again, butterfly effect, the dependency of them on the trees in order for survival in the future. If it's not clean air, then it's, as you said, the shrimp, the clean water, degradation of land, all the other aspects that they may not have seen them because.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say that unfortunately, especially with the example of Myanmar, people have a very, very high degree of awareness of the value of mangroves. And I'm saying unfortunately, it's because it took a really big disaster to bring this awareness.
What do you mean?
In 2008, there was a cyclone Nargis that hit the coast of Myanmar, and it just wiped out most of the villages located on the coast. And only those villages that were behind a healthy mangrove forest, they were spared. People from your local fishermen to the head of the government, people really seen the value of mangroves, which is literally life and death situation. And unfortunately, it took a huge tragedy to show the value of healthy ecosystem. But
Right.
I'd say that the level of awareness and understanding is very, very high.
Do you use drones for all those projects, or those are two separate projects that some have drones, some do not?
In Myanmar, currently, it's manual planting. So the drones are used for mapping and for data collection. We trialed the use of drones for mangrove planting. It was quite successful, but there are a lot of logistical challenges that it's just not worth it right now from the sort of not only a business point of view, but also just the bureaucracy around it kind of doesn't make a lot of kind of sense.
You mentioned a few obstacles, a few challenges along the way. One is soliciting the seeds,
Mhm.
the other is bureaucracy. Any other challenges that you see in planting with drones?
Generally you have to know the local landscape very well. This is why for the drone planting work, Vita Earth partners with We Robotics, which is an international NGO that precisely is addressing this challenge, which is local, kind of have a local team on the place, local presence, local knowledge. They build this network of flying labs, and the flying labs, they're located globally in the places that really need them. This is why my heart is truly in it, because the challenges of drone planting and sort of drone work, they're mostly in infrastructure. And this is why when we talk about startups, and you probably know some of them that are really purely kind of VC and business driven, they actually confine themselves to developed countries, to rich countries that of course need help, right?
Right.
But they don't need help so much, just because you need to have good roads, you need to have access to grid, you need to have electricity sources, you need to recharge the batteries, you need to have
Hmm.
mobile network, you need to have good Wi-Fi. Like there are so many things you need to have infrastructure wise. Then you need to also have bureaucracy on your side and all the permissions and all. So it's so complicated logistically speaking to run this, so that the kind of very commercially minded companies, they just basically find themselves confined to countries with developed infrastructure without corruption, and
Hmm.
with pretty much straightforward bureaucracy, although I don't think bureaucracy can ever be straightforward, but it is, better in some places. But as we know, the ecosystem is so degraded in countries, and there are so many challenges in countries that are usually poorer. The systems maybe don't work so well, and the infrastructure is not that good. So that's the biggest challenge.
Any solutions for that?
That's why we partner with an NGO that is basically investing in building these local hubs of technology, of qualified drone pilots that already know how everything works. It's local talent, it's local pilots. They have all the right permissions, they have the paperwork, and they have the local workshops to fix all the problems that happen on the field. We decided to overcome it and rethink it in a way that takes the best, very local approach and the kind of the global knowledge of engineering and building technology. So you can apply the technology, but not just come, bring it, and leave. But
Right. You bring the power back to the
yeah,
community.
exactly. So it is democratizing, not only democratizing kind of access to carbon markets, but democratizing access to technology and making it cool again. Especially from my work in Myanmar, what I've seen, what really moved me was that, we worked in these villages. There are very little young people left because young people want to go to the capital. They want to study in the university. They don't want to be farmers like their parents. But the
Hmm.
moment you come there with the drone, what you see is that for these days that we are there, it's full of young people who come from the capital back to the village to see, to be part of it.
Right.
But suddenly this becomes cool. Kenya is the same example, especially now with COVID. What we see is young people from the capital, but they return back to their villages. They bring in this knowledge, they bring in understanding of technologies. That's another big issue of the social fabric, right? Young people living to big cities.
Hmm.
And I do see technology and drones placing value on carbon, on sustainable farming and ecosystem stewardship as a mechanism to drive young people back from the capital to their villages.
This is very hopeful. What is your favorite tree?
Well, I like moringa because it's awesome and it and I also like baobab because it's just so majestic and big and beautiful.
It's hard to pick one, I guess.
Hmm.
And your Russian origin,
Hmm.
how do you say tree in Russian?
Дерево.
Cherva. This is cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Your work demonstrates to all of us how technology and the local community needs to work together in the process of restoring forest and restoring lands and obviously help Mother Nature. So, Irina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tali, and thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are all beautiful butterflies, each in his and her individual ways. I wanted to thank you for joining me today in this episode. I really appreciate you coming on this journey with me, and I hope to see you next time. And remember, it only takes a small action to make a big difference. Be a butterfly.
And that's all for this episode. Thank you for joining us today. Please subscribe to hear more of our stories of change.